The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Reading Chapter 7, Measure. Subtopic, Vanity Metrics, a word of caution. To see the danger of vanity metrics clearly, let's return once more to the early days of IMVU. Take a look at the following graph, which is from the same era in IMVU's history as that shown earlier in this chapter. It discovers the same period as the cohort style graph. In fact, it is from the same board presentation. The graph shows that traditional gross metrics for IMVU so far, total registered users and total paying customers. The gross revenue graph looks almost the same. From this point of view, things look very much exciting. That's why I call these vanity metrics. They give the rosiest picture possible. The graph shows everything going upwards steadily. You'll see a traditional hockey stick graph. As long as you focus on the top line numbers, that is signing up more customers and increase in overall revenue, you will be forgiven for thinking this product development team is making progress. The company's growth engine is working. Each month it is able to acquire customers and has a positive return on investment. The excess revenue from those customers is reinvested the next month in acquiring more. That's where the growth is coming from. But think back to the same data presented in a cohort style. IMView is adding new customers, but it is not improving yield on each group. The engine is turning, but the efforts to tune the engine are not bearing much fruit. From the traditional graph alone, you cannot tell whether IMView is on pace to build a sustainable business. You certainly can't tell anything about the efficacy of the entrepreneurial team behind it. Innovation accounting will not work if a startup is being misled by these kind of vanity metrics, gross number of customers, and so on. The alternative is the kind of metrics we use to judge our business and our learning milestones, what I call actionable metrics. Actionable metrics versus vanity metrics. To get a better sense of the importance of good metrics, let's look at the company called Grokit. Its founder, Farbood Nivi, spent a decade working as a teacher at two large for-profit education companies, Princeton Revenue and Kaplan, helping students prepare for standardized tests such as GMAT, LSAT, and SAT. His engaging classroom style won accolades from his students and promotions from his superiors. He was honored with Princeton Review's National Teacher of the Year award. But Farb was frustrated with the traditional teaching methods used by the companies. Teaching 6 to 9 hours per day to thousands of students, he had many opportunities to experiment with new approaches. Over time, Farb concluded that the traditional lecture model of education with its one-to-many instructional approach was inadequate for his students. He set out to develop a superior approach using a combination of teacher-led lectures, individual homework, and group study. In particular, Farb was fascinated by how effective the student-to-student peer-driven learning method was for his students. When students could help each other, they benefited in two ways. First, they could get customized instructions from a peer who was much less intimidating than a teacher. Second, they could reinforce their learning by teaching it to others. Over time, Farb's classes became increasingly social and successful. As this unfolded, Farb felt more and more that his physical presence in the classroom was less important. He made an important connection. I have this social learning model in my classroom. There's all this social stuff going on the web. His idea was to bring social peer-to-peer learning to people who could not afford an expensive class from Kaplan or Princeton Review or an even more expensive private tutor. From this insight, Grokkit was born. Fab explains whether you're studying for a SAT or you're studying for algebra, you study in one of three ways. You spend time with experts, you spend time on your own, and you spend time with your peers. Grokkit offers these three same format of studying. What we do is we apply technology and algorithms to optimize those three forms. Farb is a classic entrepreneurial visionary. He recounts his original insight this way. Let's forget education design up until now. Let's forget what's possible and let's redesign learning with today's students and today's technology in mind. There were plenty of multi-billion-dollar organizations in the education space, and I don't think they were innovating in a way that we needed them to. And I don't think we needed them anymore. To me, it's really all about students, and I don't feel like the students were being served as well as they could. Today, Grokkit offers many different educational products, but in the beginning, Farb followed a lean approach. Grokkit built a minimum viable product, which was simply Farb teaching test prep via popular online web conferencing tool WebEx. He built no custom software, no new technology. He simply attempted to bring his new teaching approach to students via the internet. News about a new kind of private tutoring spread quickly, and within few months, Farb was making a decent living teaching online with monthly revenues of $10,000 to $15,000. But like many entrepreneurs with ambition, Farb didn't make his MVP just to make a living. He had a vision of more collaborative, more effective kind of teaching for students everywhere. With this initial traction, he was able to raise money from some of the most prestigious investors in Silicon Valley. While I first met Farb, his company was already on the fast track to success. They had raised venture capital from well regarded investors, had built an awesome team, and were fresh off an impressive debut at one of Silicon Valley's famous startup competitions. They were extremely process oriented and disciplined. Their product development followed a rigorous version of the agile development methodology known as extreme programming. Thanks to their partnership with San Francisco based company called Pivotal Labs. Their early product was hailed by the press as breakthrough. There was only one problem. They were not seeing sufficient growth in the use of product by customers. Grokkit is an extremely excellent case study because its problems were not a matter of failure, of execution and discipline. Following standard agile practice, Grokkit's work proceeded in a series of sprints or 1 month iterations. For each sprint, Farb would prioritize the work to be done that month by writing a series of user stories, a technique taken from agile development. Instead of working a specification for a new feature that described it in terms of technical terms, Farb would write a story that described the feature from the point of view of the customer. The story helped keep the engineers focused on the customer's perspective throughout the development process. Each feature was expressed in plain language in terms everyone could understand, whether they had a technical background or not. Again, following standard agile practice, Farb was free to reprioritize these stories at any time. As he learned more about what customers wanted, he would move things around in a product backlog, the queue of stories yet to be built. The only limit on this ability to change directions was that he could not interrupt any task that was in progress. Fortunately, the stories were written in such a way that the batch size of work was only a day or two. This system is called agile development for a good reason. Teams that employ it are able to change directions quickly, stay right on their feet, and be highly responsive to changes in the business requirement of the product owner. The manager of the process, in this case, Farb, who is responsible for prioritizing the stories. How did the team feel at the end of each sprint? They consistently delivered new product features. They would collect feedback from customers in the form of anecdotes and interviews that indicated that at least some customers liked the new features. There were always a certain amount of data that was showed improvements. Perhaps the total number of customers was increasing, the total number of questions answered by students was going up, the number of returning customers was increasing. However, I sensed that Farb and his team were left with lingering doubts about the company's overall progress. Was the increase in their numbers actually caused by their development efforts, or could it be due to other factors such as mentions of Grocket in the press? When I met the team, I asked them a simple question. How do you know that the prioritization decisions that Farb is making actually make sense? The answer, that's not our department. Farb makes the decisions, we execute them. At the time, Grocket was focused on just one customer segment, prospective business school students who were studying for the GMAT. The product allowed students to engage in an online study session with fellow students who were studying for the same exam. The product was working. The students who completed the studies via Grocket achieved significantly higher scores than they had before. But the Grocket team was struggling with the age-old startup problems. How do we know which feature to prioritize? How can we get more customers to sign up and pay? How can we get our word about our product? I put this question to Farb. How confident are you that you are making the right decisions in terms of establishing priorities? Like most startup founders, he was looking at the available data and making the best educated guess he could. But this left a lot of room for ambiguity and doubt. Farr believed in his vision thoroughly and completely, yet he was starting to question whether his company was on pace to realize that vision. The product improved every day, but Farr wasn't wanted to make sure these improvements mattered to customers. I believe he deserves a lot of credit for realizing this. Unlike many visionaries who cling to the original vision, no matter what, Farb was willing to put his vision to test. Farb worked hard to sustain his team's belief that Rocket was destined for success. He was worried that morale would suffer if anyone thought that the person steering the ship was uncertain about which direction to go. Farb himself wasn't sure if his team would embrace a true lean learning culture. After all, this was part of the grand bargain of agile development. Engineers agree to adapt the product to the business's constantly changing requirements, but are not responsible for the quality of those business decisions. Agile is an efficient system of development from the point of view of developers. It allows them to stay focused on creating features and technical designs. An attempt to introduce the need to learn into that process could undermine productivity. Lean manufacturing faced similar problems when it was introduced in factories. Managers were used to focusing on utilization rate of each machine. Factories were designed to keep machines running at full capacity as much of the time as possible. Viewed from the perspective of the machine, this is efficient, but from the point of view of productivity of an entire factory, it is wildly inefficient at times. As they say in systems theory, that which optimizes one part of the system necessarily undermines the system as a whole. What Farb and his team didn't realize was that Grocket's progress was being measured by vanity metrics. The total number of customers, the total number of questions asked, that was what was causing his team to spin its wheels. Those metrics gave the team the sensation of forward motion, even though the company was making little progress. What's interesting is how close Farb's method followed superficial aspects of the lean startup learning milestones. They shipped an early product and established some baseline metrics. They had relatively short iterations of which was judged, each of which was judged by its ability to improve customer metrics. However, because Grocket was using the wrong kinds of metrics, the startup was not genuinely improving. Fard was frustrated in his effort to learn from customer feedback. In every cycle, the type of metrics his team was focusing on would change. One month they would look at gross usage numbers, another month registration numbers, and so on. Those metrics would go up and down, seemingly on their own. He couldn't draw clear cause and effect inferences. Prioritizing work correctly in in such an environment is extremely challenging. Farb could have asked his data analyst to investigate a particular question. For example, when we shipped feature X, did it affect customer behavior? But that would have required tremendous time and effort. When exactly did feature X ship? Which customers were exposed to it? Was anything else launched around the same time? Were there seasonal factors that might be skewing the data? Finding these answers would have required parsing reams and reams of data. The answer often would come weeks after the question had been asked. In the meantime, the team would have moved on to new priorities and new questions that needed urgent attention. Compared to a lot of startups, the Crockett team had a huge advantage. They were tremendously disciplined. A disciplined team may apply the wrong methodology, but can shift gears quickly once it discovers its errors. Most important, a disciplined team can experiment with its own working style and draw meaningful conclusions. Cohort and split tests. Grocket changed the metrics they use to evaluate success in two ways. Instead of looking at gross metrics, Grocket switched to cohort-based metrics, and instead of looking for cause and effect relationship after the fact, Grocket would launch each new feature as a true split test experiment. A split test experiment is one in which different versions of a product are offered to customers at the same time. By observing the changes in behavior between the two groups, one can make inferences about the impact of different variations. This technique was pioneered by direct mail advertisers. For example, consider a company that sends customers a backlog of products to buy, such as lands, end, or crate and barrel. If you wanted to test a catalog design, you could send a new version of it to 50% of the customers and send the old version of it to 50% of customers. To assure a scientific result, both catalogs would contain identical products. The only difference would be the changes in design. To figure out if the new design was effective, or all you have to do was keep track of the sales figures for both group of customers. This technique is sometimes called A/B testing after the practice of assigning letter names to each variation. Although split testing often is thought of as a marketing specific or even a direct marketing specific practice, lean startups incorporate it directly into product development. These changes led to an immediate change in Farb's understanding of the business. Split testing often uncovers surprising things. For example, many features that make the product better in the eyes of the designer, engineers, and designers have no impact on customer behavior. This was the case at Grocket, as it has been in every company I have seen adopt this technique. Although working with split tests seems to be more difficult because it requires extra accounting and metrics to keep track of each variation, it almost always saves tremendous amount of time in the long run by eliminating work that doesn't matter to customers. Split testing also helps teams to refine their understanding of what customers want and don't want. Grocket's team constantly added new ways for their customers to interact with each other in the hope that the social communication tools would increase the product's value. Inherent in those efforts was the belief that customers desired more communication during their study. When split testing revealed that the extra features did not change customer behavior, it called that belief into question. The questioning inspired the team to seek a deeper understanding of what customers really wanted. They brainstormed new ideas for product experiments that might have more impact. In fact, many of these ideas were not new. They had simply been overlooked because the company was focused on building social tools. As a result, Grokkey tested an intensive solo studying mode, complete with quests and game-like levels, so that students could have the choice of studying by themselves or with others. Just as Fab's original classroom, this proved extremely effective. Without the discipline of split testing, the company might not have had that realization. In fact, over time, through dozens of tests, it became clear that the key to student engagement was to offer them a combination of social and solo features. Students prefer having a choice of how to study. Thank you for listening to the Lean Startup. I will continue to read tomorrow. If you want to buy the book, the link is in the description.